Hello, welcome back to Aetheral Space 11.26, Terrain Supreme Part 2. We are back.
At the time of recording, Part 1 will be out tomorrow, and I can't wait for you guys to see it, but also I'm now realizing how far ahead I will be again. Tan, when are you putting up the Patreon, by the way?
Very soon, next week, most likely.
Next week? Oh, yeah. I'm excited for that. Yeah. It'll be cool. I think this is a good time to do it. I hope at least that people are as hyped about the Supreme lore as I am. I did hype it up a lot because I thought it was cool lore, but I'm realizing now that people, I don't know how people react to it because it is a long flashback, which normally I think is not necessarily a good tactic, but I think for a character like the Supreme that's been built up so much, it's really cool to especially because we were kind of surprised by who he is. Yeah, very interesting. And we are at Part 2 of Terrain Supreme. How many parts do you plan for Terrain Supreme, by the way? Oh, hell yeah. Alright, let's just jump right into it. It rained. Hands in the pockets of his jeans, the Supreme felt the cool water pelt at his shoulders as he walked. Refreshingly cool, even with the flames all around. He cracked his neck and let out a heavy breath as he followed his guide. Esmeralda sure recruited strange folk, though. What was going on with this kid's body? Some kind of ability? It looked like he'd recorded parts of himself, but for what benefit? Interesting stuff, but not what he was here for. "Hey, boy," the Supreme said, raising his eyebrows. "I'm losing patience. How much longer?" The guide looked back at him with that strange half-face. "Still a while," the Codgeton said. "Skipper's far from the battlefield. You don't want anyone interrupting your fight, right?" "Fair enough," the Supreme muttered. As he walked, he closed his eyes, angling his face upward so as to feel the rain against it. Simple things like this reminded him he was alive, that he had a body that could experience sensations, that he was inside this world. Even so, he couldn't help but think back on the past. How long had it been since he'd felt like this? Since he'd felt that there was a point to anything? Since he'd felt like exerting the effort to live a life? Way too damn long. The boy called Cadman trained. Jotun, T, was a harsh teacher and a merciless one. Cadman soon came to understand that when he'd agreed to learn, he'd surrendered all other moments in his life. Every hour of the day, every day of the year, he would be drilled relentlessly, thrown into life-or-death situations to see if he would survive, thrown into deprivation chambers to tap into his aether more fully, thrown into the kinds of challenges a Supreme would need to overcome. And as for home and the village, when more bandits came, he killed them. When pirates came, he killed them. When special officers came, he killed them. He painted his hands with every kind of blood, and made every kind of enemy. His body became a weapon specialized for killing. His mind became an engine for understanding and manipulating his aether. Just by reaching out, he felt like he could take the whole world in his hand. Soon the time came that the planet he'd been born, his home, was not enough. They took a ship and began prowling the galaxy, searching for strong opponents for Cadman to hone himself against. The Second Dead, the Birthday Bandito, Putrid Fate. Each battle brought him close to death, and each victory brought him closer to greatness. All for the day that Jotun had promised, all the way back at the start of his training. The day his teacher would avenge himself against his most hated enemy. The day Cadman would take the throne he'd always dreamed of. The day they'd change the shape of this world. It didn't come in the way he'd expected, the way he'd dreamed about. On the day the world began to change, Cadman was exercising in the ship's gym, pummeling a reinforced punching bag with blows, leaving heavy dents in the metal beneath the cushioning. Sweat was pouring down his sculpted body, pooling on the floor below, but the speed and precision of his movements didn't change at all. Like a machine, he continued to operate with unchanging efficiency, until, with a final heavy blow, he sent the bag flying into the wall. As Cadman wiped the sweat from his forehead, he saw that Ellie was standing by the entrance to the room. Even after 5 years, he could never sense her presence. She and Adrian had been growing stronger alongside him as companions, after all. Who was Adrian again? Was he the nerd boy?
Yeah.
So he's 15 now, and they're 19. Okay. Oh, is he their Dragon? I love reading and learning. My favorite activity is sleeping. I'm trying to remember his voice. It's a little older now. "What's up?" Or no, it'd be more like, "What's up?" Cadman grinned, sweeping his wet hair back with a hand. With careful fingers, Ellie adjusted the scarf that covered her mouth, pulling it down just a little so her words could be heard. The look in her eyes was strange. Cadman couldn't quite tell what kind of emotion was glimmering there. When he heard her words, though, he had no doubt that his own eyes held that same gleam. "The Supreme's dead," she said. In the end, Henry, now being called the Glutton, had passed away from an ordinary heart attack. Clearly he'd overindulged himself. That, or one of his advisors had grown tired of his erratic behavior and taken matters into their own hands. If that was the case, though, nobody seemed to be taking responsibility for it, and so the line of supreme succession had become complicated. How do you, though, like, can anyone just be like, "That was me"? Like, do they have to prove it?
There is some measure of proof that needs to be provided, yeah.
Generally speaking, there are two ways to become supreme. The first is to kill the current supreme with your own hands, and to have the supremacy at large acknowledge that you did so. This is the simplest route, relatively speaking. In a situation like this, though, where a supreme passes away from natural causes, or their killer is unknown or unavailable, another method of selection becomes necessary. The Dawn Contest. I just had a dumb lore idea.
Yeah?
For a past supreme. A supreme that got bitten by, like, a super poisonous snake, and for, like, a week the snake was supreme.
I thought you'd be like, let's do this one more time.
Yeah! He's just like, so it just kills the snake, because it's a snake. The first is to... Oh, wait, what's going on? Did I miss something?
You went backwards.
In a situation like this, though...
You went backwards
another
even
method.
further.
The Dawn of... Okay, where am I?
Yeah, the Dawn Contest.
The Dawn Contest. Participants from all across the Supremacy, the very strongest, would clash against each other for the right to challenge the Supreme Heir. This first stage of the contest would consist of massive melees on 16 planets, the survivors of which would move on to the tournament proper. Is literally anyone allowed to enter, or is it like you have to pass a preliminary test?
The melees are the preliminary tests, basically. That's the meat grinder.
So, it's like the Hunter exam. Like, you have to find the place first. The victor among the challengers would then be pitted against the Supreme Heir, and the winner would become supreme. Throughout the history of the Supremacy, there had only been 7 Dawn contests. The 8th would decide Henry the Glutton's successor. As Jodin finished explaining the Dawn contest to Cadman, the young man hunched over in his chair, fingers steepled underneath his chin. "So basically," Cadman muttered, "if I beat everyone else in the tournament, I'm supreme?" "A little simplified, but yes," Jotun nodded, banishing the holograms he'd been using for his explanation with a wave of his finger. "I have no doubt you'll survive the melees with your skills, but those who make it to the contest proper will be the best of the best of the best. Legends in their own rights. Larson Rain, Samson Rhodes, those sorts of killers. So in this contest, do you have to kill your opponent, or can you just, like, knock them out?
You can knock them out. Or they can
so,
surrender.
like, people do survive. Ah, okay. That's probably common. Ellie lurked in the corner of the briefing room, her arms crossed. "Of course," she said, "if you do win, you know what that means, right? You'll have to take him on." Cadman swallowed and then nodded, squeezing his hands into fists. "The heir." The hologram flickered into existence once again, this time displaying an image of the final opponent, the Supreme Heir, the only living blood of Henry the Glutton. He shared most of the previous Supreme's physical features, jet black hair and pupils contrasting with snow-white skin. A black cloak was wrapped around his form as well, and if you looked too deeply into those pitch-black eyes, even as a hologram, you started to imagine he could see you back. Adrian pushed his glasses up his nose with one hand and swiped through his script with the other. "The heir was Henry's primary enforcer during much of his reign. He has a reputation for, competency." "Brutality, more like it," Ellie muttered, looking at the hologram. Adrian shrugged. Call it what you like, but he got the job done. For the last few years, the former Supreme distanced himself from the heir, though. Maybe he was scared of an assassination? There were rumors that the heir had ties to terrorist groups." Jotun swiped his hand once more, and the menacing figure of the heir disappeared. "When a Supreme dies," he said dismissively, "all sorts of rumors always pop up about potential successors. People spread them, you see, so that the people they dislike have less of a chance." Cadman glanced up at his teacher. "It's not up to the public who becomes supreme," he said gruffly. "It's all down to who's the strongest." With a thin smile on his lips, Jotun chuckled. "Believe me, boy, an unpopular supreme never lasts long." Henry did. 6, 7 years? Jotun scoffed. That's not a long time for a Supreme, really. And Henry wasn't necessarily unpopular. Some people thought his, tendencies were a sort of fear campaign. A good deterrent against the UAP, understand? Cadman frowned. For a man who'd been driven out by the depravity of the former Supreme, Jotun certainly didn't seem to have much resentment for the man. But then again, Cadman's teacher had never been one to openly display his emotions. In any case, the matter was simple. Was the Supreme Heir born? Cadman asked. Adrian blinked, confused, cocking his head. Well, yes. Oh, sorry, this is Adrian. Well, yes, of course. Although if you believe the stories, then he can die. Cadman stood up, cracking his neck. When's this thing starting? Is this someone else speaking?
That is, I think like a bit of a King Arthur sort of figure.
El Dorado, Seal of Fortune! Cadman felt strength and stamina flow into him as he dodged a swing of Samson Rhodes' massive sword, the roar of the crowd nearly deafening. As he flipped through the air, golden strings of light pulled his wound shut and stopped the bleeding. The same happened with Rhodes, a nasty gash that Cadman had opened on his forehead instantly snapping shut. The abilities of Samson Rhodes, the Gilded Knight, affected everyone in there. Oh no! No! The Gilded Knight's the Abyssal Knight, isn't he?
Yeah.
They're the same guy! They're the same guy! No! He fell! Fallen Angel! El Dorado! What was the name of his abilities in Arc 6,
They
though?
were like Sodom, Gomorrah, those sorts of things.
No! He's fallen, and his name's Samson, like from the Bible. Who cut his hair? Who did it? Which one of these sick bastards? Affected everyone in their range, after all. The power and healing boost El Dorado provided would benefit both of them. Cadman threw himself to the ground to avoid another death swing of Rhodes' shining blade, sunlight bouncing off the strange material, and casting the arena in a kaleidoscope of color. It was like a dream, both the landscape and the fact he was here at all. When he'd fought his way through the melee, when he'd climbed his way up the rankings. All that time, he'd expected the dream to suddenly be cut short. Oh my god, did they literally battle royale to get to the tournament?
Yeah.
That's fucking sick. He'd imagined he'd wake up any second. And yet here he was in the finals, fighting in the arena, surrounded by a crowd of thousands, with billions more watching across the galaxy, facing off against the Gilded Knight for the right to challenge the Supreme Heir. Atlantis! Rhodes roared, his braided beard fluttering in the wind. Seal of Pressure! A new ability, a new seal. Rhodes hadn't used this one yet. At this close range, and judging from the name, it could be trouble. Cadman would have liked to experience the ability himself, but under the circumstances, best to play it safe. Excel Surge, Cadman muttered under his breath. Analysis. Cadman possessed 2 Aether abilities of his own, Badge of Honor and Excel Surge. Badge of Honor allowed him to tap into the abilities of those he shared a close bond and similarity with. Excel Surge optimized whatever ability it was paired with, taking it far beyond its usual performance. Usually, Adrian's analysis would require sustained observation of the target before it would provide a result. With Excel Surge, though... Ability name! Oh, sorry. Ability name, Atlantis Seal of Pressure, Adrian's voice said, robotically monotone, directly into Cadman's head. Ability description. Creates a field of variable size in which any stationary objects will be immediately crushed against the ground. User is not immune. Recommendation, engage in constant movement and attempt to restrain opponent. Oh my goodness. Seemed about right. Cadman clicked his fingers back into place. He'd suffered an injury earlier and blasted off the ground, leaping away from the incoming Rhodes. Raising his hand up high, Cadman called out once more, Excel Surge! Pursuer! The weapon he summoned was more than 3 times the size of Ellie's usual weapon, and more spherical. A chaotic mass of intertwining blades, sparks flying as they scraped against each other. It zoomed towards Rhodes at lightning speed, carving through the ground as it flew, a meat grinder in motion. The Gilded Knight thrust his greatsword forwards, prepared to meet the pursuer head-on, just as Cadman had anticipated. Pursuer, Swarm Mode! After watching her ability be so easily defeated by the King of Nails, Ellie had taken steps to improve it over the years, and, through a badge of honor, Cadman had inherited and surpassed those improvements. In the instant before Rhodes' sword would have smashed through the pursuer, it exploded into countless tiny copies of itself, each flying towards Rhodes from a different angle. From behind and the front, from the left and the right, from above, even from below, as some of the pursuers tunneled through the arena floor, every angle of escape was covered. Rhodes would have no choice but to block. When that happened, Cadman would have to restrain him, halt the movement he would have used to deflect the attacks, and let him be hit by his own ability. Rhodes' greatsword moves like a golden whip, tirelessly smashing the pursuers out of the air as they flew towards him, debris dissipating into aether. Even as he was blocking with all he had, though, Rhodes' eyes were fixed directly on Cadman. His attention was absolute. So as long as he's moving his arms, he won't get crushed.
As long as part of his movement, though, yeah.
Okay. So couldn't he, tap his toes, even, if he gets grabbed by Cadman?
He could. With, restrain it'd have to be, a total restrain.
Interesting. But wouldn't that also require him to be totally restrained?
Not necessarily. He's not necessarily going to use his own body, in a wrestling move.
Oh, I got you. His attention was absolute. Cadman felt exactly the same. It was a strange feeling, like his breath had turned to ice within his lungs. Both of them could feel it. The fight was about to be decided. The winner of the Dawn contest was about to be determined. The two warriors lunged forwards. Shangri-La! Rhodes bellowed. Can he do multiple seals at once?
He has to switch them out.
So he's doing a new one now. Seal of Absolution! Cadman threw his hand forward and screamed with all his might, Excel Surge! Putrid Fate! And one of them fell. In the end, Rhodes had survived the injuries caused by Putrid Fate's ability, but he had been in no state to continue fighting. Kneeling to one ravaged knee, he had honorably surrendered to Cadman, granting him the title of victor. It all still seemed so surreal. Cadman had been sitting in his hotel room for hours, staring at the wall, not quite able to believe this was all really happening. He'd won. He'd won the Dawn contest. Tomorrow he would face the Supreme Heir, the last obstacle, the last thing standing in his way before he could claim his dream. I'm the man who's going to be supreme! He'd said that. He'd said that again, and again, and again. But deep down, had he ever really believed it could happen? A disbelieving chuckle rose to his lips as he ran his hands down his face. Oh no, she did it correctly! Wait, she doesn't do Penny like Dragon?
Both versions of the saying float around the galaxy a bit.
Oh. Stater for your thoughts? Said Ellie. Cadman looked up. He'd stopped getting surprised by his friend's sudden appearances ages ago. There was nobody better at hiding than her. He smiled. Oh no, I feel like that's foreshadowing something that will happen. He smiled, nerves making...
Sorry, please continue.
Nerves making the expression thin and trembling. When he didn't reply, she just sat down on the bed next to him, eyes fixed on the muted videograph. It was a news broadcast, countless talking heads discussing the ultimate bout that would take place the next day. Not the best thing to calm nerves. Ellie swiped a hand and tuned the monitor off. Long way from home, huh? She finally said, filling the silence. How long has it been since we've been back there? Too long, Cadman said quietly. Once Jotun's location had been discovered, it had no longer been safe to return to home. For the last few years, they'd been moving from planet to planet, living mostly on their ship, preparing for this fight. It had been so long. Cadman cracked his mouth open. Ellie looked over. If I went back to home now and forgot all about this, would you come with me? The words felt alien coming out of his mouth, but they would not be constrained. If nothing else, he had to make sure he'd voiced the possibility. Even if he already knew the answer. What are you talking about? Ellie smiled softly, resting her head on his shoulder. You're the man who's going to become supreme, right? Cadman blinked, and the blink quickly became a resting of his eyes. Yeah, he replied. Yeah, I am, aren't I? Of course you are, Ellie said. A moment passed. You idiot, Ellie finished. Yeah, Cadman grinned. Yeah, I am. Even here, deep underground, Cadman could hear the roaring of the crowds outside. The arena was filled now with more people than Cadman had ever seen in his life, all keen to see the shape the next century would take. The room was boiling hot, but Cadman still couldn't help but shake. When he'd imagined this, it had been like a videograph or something, a scene he'd been observing. Now, though, the sweat trickling down the back of his neck, the feeling of the metal locker against his hand, all of this was distressingly real. This wasn't his imagination anymore. He'd been given this room to prepare before his fight against the air, but he just couldn't bring himself to sit still. Over the last few hours, he'd paced across the room countless times, familiarizing himself with it. He'd adjusted his armor as much as it could be adjusted. He'd tried sitting and meditating on his Aether core, but with the situation, he couldn't quite find the concentration. Ellie and Adrian should have been here at least, but they hadn't showed yet. No doubt Jotun had told them to stay back and let him prepare in peace. The old man did prize isolation just a little too much. Cadman threw himself down onto the bench and looked at the article in his hand. A handkerchief, once bright yellow, now faded from time. As a kid, he'd worn this around his neck as a cape, but now he had a real one that billowed in the wind. "This is you," he thought, looking down at the handkerchief. "Don't let that kid down. You're the man who's going to be supreme, right?" he muttered to himself. "Are you?" replied the supreme heir.
I don't know if I go for that voice.
Alright, new rule.
Okay.
When a new character comes up, you need to give me the voice
You must
ahead of
understand it's
time.
not a script.
Alright, go ahead. Give it to me.
So it's going to be more like this. It's like a sort of like kindly voice almost.
Are you?
Maybe
Replied the
a
supreme
little bit
heir.
less like
Oh,
whimsical.
would you like to voice him? Go ahead.
It's just like this.
You be the
like
supreme
this sort of
heir.
thing. Sure, I can voice him. Are you?
Go for it. Replied the supreme heir. Cadman leapt to his feet in an instant, golden aether flaring around him as he whirled around to face the enemy. There, right before him in the middle of the room, was the heir. The eerily handsome young man was just standing there, wearing a dark pinstripe suit and a black cloak, smiling generally at him. Do you mean genially?
Yeah, that's what autocorrect fucked me again.
"What are you doing here?" Cadman demanded. Stupid question. In a situation like this, there was no question what the heir wanted. It had happened before. Cases where attacks had taken place outside of official Dawn contest matches to manipulate the results. The heir had decided to start the fight early. How had Cadman not anticipated that? Stupid, stupid. With a carefree laugh, the heir raised his hands placatingly.
Please, you don't have to be so tense.
He said, and despite the situation, his voice radiated utter benevolence and serenity.
I didn't mean to startle you, it's just I wanted to meet you before the fight. Is that okay?
Cadman blinked, fists still raised. For a second he thought about entertaining this, but no. "Get out of here. Now." The heir smiled that calm smile, cocking his head slightly.
You're a very talented young man. I see why people like you. I just went to see Samson Rhodes, and he was impressed with you as well.
He'd seen Rhodes? The Gilded Knight was meant to be still undergoing medical treatment. Maybe still be. Instead of be still.
Sorry.
Did you kill him? No, you're good. I'm just... Hey, are you okay?
Yeah, no worries.
I'm giving you a hug. Hey,
Virtual
you're doing
hug,
good,
sending
kid.
you virtual hug.
Yeah, exactly. The
10%,
gift.
20%, 30%. Uh-oh, you got a virus. Now your life is no longer beautiful.
Did you kill him? Cadman asked, throat dry. Despite the accusation, the heir's dark eyes did not so much as blink.
Kill him? I think that would have been very cruel, don't you? There'd have been no benefit in my doing so, so I didn't. Are you nervous?
The heir took a step forward, and Cadman let his golden aether surge even further, holy light shining through the room. The light reflected off nearly everything in the room, save for the heir himself. He alone stood distinct, like an ink stain on white paper, or a black hole. "Leave," Cadman growled. Another step and he would attack. Cadman would hold himself to that. The heir sighed, seemingly downcast as his gaze slid down to the floor.
It seems you don't want to talk to me.
He said calmly.
That makes me sad. However, I will respect your opinion. I'm really happy that I got to meet you. Let's both do our best in the fight, okay?
There was no need to reply. To reply was to be distracted. Cadman watched, completely silent, as the Supreme Heir turned and began to walk out of the room. He was just about to relax slightly, when the heir lingered in the doorway.
Oh,
He said softly.
I almost forgot.
The heir shrugged his cape, and 2 objects dropped to the floor with wet cracks.
I think these belong to you, Cadman.
Cadman blinked, and slowly, why so slowly, looked down at the objects. Bottom! His heart hammered. Bottom! He didn't recognize the objects. He didn't. They didn't look like anything he knew. They were nothing. They weren't even there. He didn't know what he was looking at. There was nothing to say about it. They weren't worth looking at. He didn't know them. He didn't know those faces. That wasn't blood. He didn't see any blood. He didn't see that white hair. He didn't see those glasses. It was nothing. He didn't recognize the objects. He didn't feel sick. He didn't feel cold. He didn't. This is the part where, if Aetheral Space was an anime, every time Skipper's been using heartbeat moves, we heard a thump, and we're hearing that thump now. For the badumps. Badum! He didn't see anything. Badum! He didn't see Ellie and Adrian's heads lying on the floor before him. Cadman screamed, long and hard, with such force that his throat felt like it was going to burst into flames. His aether cracked and roared like a hurricane as it surged through the room, sending documents and clothing flying from the sheer force. It felt like his eyes were going to pop in their sockets. It felt like his tongue was about to fall out of his mouth. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't breathe because he was too busy screaming. By the time he'd fallen from his perch and landed on his knees, the scream had faded into a long, dry croak. The air looked down at him, listening intently to it.
It seems I've surprised you.
The air said kindly.
I'm sorry, that wasn't my intention at all. Do you need to be alone for a bit?
Cadman looked up. His eyes were bloodshot rubies. I'll kill you! He roared, and his aether exploded into godlight. It was an unorthodox ending to the Dawn contest. The final match had begun early, in the changing rooms, and from there the destruction had carved a path right to the arena proper. Half of the building was already in flames from the crossfire. Cadman was surrounded by bodies as he hurled another massive pursuer towards the air, foam falling from his lips. At some point their fight had moved into the crowd itself, and the casualties had been severe. Which of them had done the killing? Cadman couldn't remember. All he could remember were those objects. All he could remember was his hatred. He'd kill him, 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 he'd kill him! The pursuer, driven by golden aether, hurtled towards the air, but with a wave of his hand, the weapon was utterly erased from existence. Not even debris remained. The air smiled softly as he stood atop a pile of bodies, the screams of the fleeing survivors ringing through the air.
Like I said, you're a very talented young man.
He spoke down to Cadman.
What kind of policies will you institute as Supreme? I'm interested to know.
Shut up! Cadman cried, charging forward. Excel Surge! Surgeon General! He held his hand out to the side, and a massive scalpel the size of a greatsword materialized there. The original had been able to reopen wounds the target had suffered over the last few days. Under Excel Surge, every injury the target had sustained over the last year would be inflicted once again. If he could hit an undefended spot, he could win. He could turn this fucker into mincemeat. The air sighed, looking genuinely disappointed.
It seems you still don't want to talk to me,
he said.
Again, that makes me sad. If it's your decision, though, I'll respect it.
As Cadman charged in, the air raised his hand, and with a spark of black aether, a swarm of dark locusts flooded out through his palm. As one, they streamed through the air towards Cadman, hungry mandibles clicking at the air. Cadman knew this attack. They'd studied the air, They'd studied the air! These locusts were one of his favorite ways of using his ability. They devoured any flesh that they could come into contact with, but they only survived for a few seconds outside of the air's aether. Golden aether surging around his legs, Cadman leapt up, a crater forming in the ground from the sheer power of his kick. As he sailed through the air towards the... As he sailed through the air towards the air, avoiding the locusts, he raised the Surgeon General up high, ready to bring it down on his enemy the second he came into range. What's the air's name again?
We don't know.
Oh, I see. The air had seen that coming, of course. He threw his hand up, and immediately a wall of solid black material appeared in front of him as a shield. Cadman's mind ran at a desperate speed. He had no idea how strong that shield was. There was no guarantee that the Surgeon General would be strong enough to break through, but the shield only covered the front. The air's back was still exposed. He threw a hand of his own out to the side and fired off a bolt of pure aether. People said that pure aether was worthless as a projectile. It did nothing in terms of damage when it hit, but Cadman had always found it a useful way of controlling vertical movement. Is he rocket jumping with his aether?
He is.
Cadman's body went flying off the opposite way from the force of the blast, sending him around the gap in the shield. Landing on the ground again, he immediately kicked off, a geyser of concrete exploding behind him as he lunged in. The air waved a hand through the air, conjuring a clicking sword that looked like a mixture between a centipede and a spinal cord. Cling, cling! Twice his weapon and the Surgeon General collided, sparks and dark ichor flying in every direction. But neither the air's defense or Cadman's offense diminished in the least. Cadman could feel fire burning in his mind as he looked at his opponent, pushing with all his might as their blades locked. The bastard was still smiling.
Despite the prince's attempts at interference,
the Supreme Heir said.
I think we've had a fairly interesting dawn contest, don't you?
Shut it! Cadman screamed, and that second of distraction almost killed him. All around the two of them, countless spears of graphite burst out of the ground, their tips pointed directly at Cadman's heart. He jumped off the ground to avoid their initial lunge, but they pursued, snapping off at angles to chase after him as he rose into the air. Each swing of the Surgeon General shattered one of the blades, but there was always another to take its place. They were fragile but inevitable, and they struck fast enough that Cadman didn't have time to switch abilities. The Heir just stood there, looking up amidst a forest of blades. He was still smiling.
I've been watching you for a while now, Cadman.
He called up to the young man fighting for his life.
And I've been very impressed. You've demonstrated to me that you have a strong spirit and will. Well done.
Shut up! Cadman roared again, shattering the blades around him with a lightning-fast whip of the Surgeon General. As he began falling again, he dispelled the scalpel, pulling his arm back instead. A punch. He'd finish this with a punch. He'd take this bastard's heart in his hand and crush it! The Heir made no move to dodge. He just stood there, hands at his side, watching calmly as Cadman fell towards him.
For that reason,
the Heir said. Is this Cadman talking?
Yeah.
Die! So much aether was boiling around Cadman's arm that it looked more like a golden beam than anything else. The instant he came into the Heir's range, he thrust it forwards, right towards the Heir's chest. That soft smile spread into a wicked grin. And there was a resounding, tearing noise as Cadman's fist plunged right through the Supreme Heir's body, ripping back out his back. As the Heir's body flopped forward, he leaned in towards Cadman and whispered into his ear.
I shall give you a throne.
Cadman shook. The air was all cold in the inside, like a snowman, and as Cadman pulled his fist free and the air fell to the ground, the man showed no signs of dying. He just stared up at Cadman, his usual smile painted red by blood. The announcement of the winner, of the new Supreme, rang out through what was left of the arena. But Cadman did not hear. Wait, is this fucker the prisoner?
Oh.
Is he? On the shisha? Look at me with my reading comprehension. Oh, fuck! He just stood there, listening to the ringing of his ears, hands limp at his sides. The fury that had animated him slipped away, and he fell to his knees. All the hatred, all the passion, all the fire suddenly went out, and Cadman was left with nothing but that cold emptiness in his chest. The Heir could have dodged. He could have dodged easily. Cadman hadn't even gotten revenge. He'd been humored. All of this meant nothing. Lock him away, Cadman muttered, and muttered, and muttered again, looking down darkly at the Heir. He kept muttering it until the Supremacy representatives reached him, and it was the first thing they heard from him. They loyally acquiesced, securing the former Heir and dragging him away. The Heir, now nothing but a prisoner, just kept smiling at Cadman as he vanished from sight. Lock him away, Cadman repeated. It was his first act as Supreme. Wow! I was about to ask then who did he have his heir with, but I remember you said that she was like a test tube baby or something. Yeah. Damn, that's so cruel. And they mentioned the prince. I know at least there was someone who's gonna nerd the fuck out over that. I think J.T. or Land maybe. Oh my god. Good chapter! I want to read the next one. I don't have time tonight.
Yeah,
fuck!
And the Heir knows about the prince as well.
So his ability, I guess it still works even if the person's dead, because he was still using Pursuer and shit. So, does he still have those abilities to this day?
He does.
So it's with people he's close to. So was he close to Skipper at some point to get Heartbeat Shotgun?
Well, he has a bond and similarity is what he requires.
Oh, and I did say that they were pretty similar. Wow. Alright, fun fact. I asked you before in the chat about Aether Laws. What do Aether Laws look like in the UAP?
So generally in the UAP is made of lots of the different governments, because this can differ depending where you are, but it's sort of central.
And I imagine they have that both to like keep things under control, because when you have a planet with like 1 trillion people, if like even a fourth of them are all using Aether, it would be just constant chaos.
Yeah.
So what does that look like?
Usually it's some sort of license you require to be able to use it, and it's like for a certain purpose.
That's how I know you're British.
Well, it's like...
Oi! You got your Aether license!
It's like, it's not just for an Aether license, like, generally, it's Aether for a specific purpose. Whether if it's in combat, you generally require some sort of military service to earn that. But for other means, you do you have to go under some sort of strict protocols, usually.
I assume there's like some exceptions, like you get a permit just like how you do to drive to like practice Aether before you apply to use it.
There's a training license,
And like I imagine reinforcing as self-defense is not
that's usually
punishable by
outside of
death.
it.
So what does punishments look like for breaking Aether rules? Like, is it a couple years?
Usually a couple of years, yeah.
It's not like a lifetime or a death penalty.
On a case-by-case basis, obviously. Like, it depends what you use it to do.
Like using your Aether to pickpocket someone is like 6 months to a year. Using your Aether to murder someone's like 30 to life or whatever.
You can get a all-purpose license though for life, which is what they give to people called the 10 Nebula. Who could those be?
Are those like that was actually going to be my other world building for next week. So don't answer this now. Save it for next episode. But think about this. What is the closest equivalent to special officers for the UAP? Like, who are their top guys, so to speak? Unless that is the 10 Nebula. In which case, I guess you'll just tell me more about them next time.
Yeah, probably will.
Alright. Wow! And I have to wait for everyone. This is bullshit. This is why you need to make the Patreon so I can talk to people about this. Fuck! I feel good about calling the prisoner thing, though.
I'm just proud of you.
Oh, thank you. That's that reading comprehension. Oh, why is the air so evil?
He was so kindly.
He spoke so kindly. I almost believed his facade. I was like, wow, first normal Aetheral Space character. He's not going to do some weird, crazy gimmick shit. Oh, there are heads. Man. I'm so good. I'm so excited. Alright. Well, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye!
Bye!